Welcome, everybody. We're really pleased to have everybody joining us today, and so thrilled to such a great group to be able to talk about what's happening in the creator journalism space, the indie provider space, as this field continues to get more concrete in building awareness and focus and attention across the globe, really. CNTI recently did some research that Jay is going to talk about just in a little bit, talking to a mix of indie providers in the US and then also in South Africa. That report is coming out very shortly, which again, Jay can share more on. So we're really pleased to be able to bring this group together to talk about some of those findings, but more importantly, to talk about some of the lived experiences within those findings. I'm going to take just a minute to introduce the group and let each of them say a little bit more about themselves before we launch in. We will have questions that we very much welcome from all of those who are attending this, all of you who are attending this session today. And if you put them in the chat, Kayla here will be monitoring that and be sure that we get to those in the second half of this segment. So for anybody who doesn't know, am Amy Mitchell. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for News Technology and Innovation, and I'm pleased to be able to moderate this session today. We have with us Phil Edwards, who's an independent journalist and video creator who left Vox in 2024 to build his own self-titled YouTube channel, has nearly 500,000 subscribers. He's reporting on history, business, and culture. And then another creator we have with us is Terrill Haigler, who's known as Fav Trashman in Philadelphia, as a community activist, nonprofit founder, social media creator, who turned all of that firsthand knowledge and experience into a platform for civic engagement and clean street advocacy. And has been doing a lot of different pieces in that space. We also have Rachel Lobdell, who's the executive director of News Creator Corps, which is one of the creator support organizations that has come into existence recently to help work with this group. It's a nonprofit that trains content creators and community messengers to share accurate information and counter misinformation. And then we also have with us Jay Barchas-Lichtenstein, who's the senior research manager here at CNTI and was lead on this research around indie information providers and as well as other work in the evolving news landscape, journalism, and AI. So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I really look forward to this conversation. I'm going to ask you all to just, build out the very short bio I did with just a minute or so about yourselves. Maybe we can start with you, Phil.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, basically, I was a video journalist for 9 or 10 years, I think. It all blurs together at Vox, and worked primarily on their YouTube channel, but also on their Netflix show for a little bit. My beat was always really eclectic. It would range from really straightforward stories about pseudoephedrine to AI to me visiting a really nice office building and giving a tour of it. And so it was always a bit all over the place. But the process that they had there was very self-managed and kind of one-man banding is sort of the phrase that you would hear a lot. And so that set me up well for doing something pretty similar on my YouTube channel where I just kind of delve into whatever topics interest me and try to reach people through it. So, yeah.
Yeah, 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 it's terrific. And so, Phil brings the kind of coming from the journalism experience, the journalism world, into branching out into his own area, which is, I know, a lot of the mix of who we talked with in the research at jail share in a minute. And then, Cheryl, you come from a different background in terms of what you build out. Can you just share a bit more on yourself and your
Yeah,
background?
yeah. So again, thanks for having me, guys. I'm honored to be with such esteemed colleagues in this industry. But I am actually a former sanitation worker for the city of Philadelphia. I actually was throwing trash during the pandemic, and it's that way propelled me to start my Instagram. And when I started my Instagram, I had no idea this was going to be the route that it would take. I just was so fed up with how dirty Philly was and how people were treating sanitation workers. And I mean, my first post was June 17th, 2020. By September, I was on the Kelly Clarkson show, then David Muir, then Good Morning America. Then I got invited to the White House, and then congressional citation and awards. And I started a nonprofit because I was like, this really must be my calling. And so for the last couple of years, about 4 years, I've been advocating for clean streets and advocating for sanitation workers, but also educating people and kind of connecting the dots between poverty and blight and trash and just um, giving people power back. You know, we're in a time where a lot of people are waiting on government to do for them. And so I like to be an example of you don't have to wait for government. You could do it yourself.
Mm. Super cool. We were just talking before the segment about what one can do for themselves on their grill brush decision
Yeah.
making. Maybe we can talk more about that in a minute. Rachel, I'd love to hear more about your background and also what led you to launch News Creator Corps.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, I spent almost 20 years as a journalist in very traditional, what we would have back in the day called like print newsrooms, primarily newspapers. And I spent a lot of time doing digital innovation work, audience cultivation, and hit a lot of roadblocks in my ability to really change things in a way that would bring in an audience that was being totally underserved by mainstream media. And so I did a lot of thinking about why I cared so deeply about journalism. And it's really about arming people with the information that they need to make the best choices for themselves. And when I was realistic about what the information economy looked like, that was happening at the creator level. But like 77% of creators do not have a background in journalism or comms. And so we launched NCC almost a year ago now at this point. And we focus solely on creators who have the audience, but they don't have a background in journalism. And so we run these fellowships that are paid experiences for creators, and we teach fact-checking skills, things like sourcing, interviewing, how to spot AI, how to file for public records, to just really take what they're doing to the next level and make sure that they are disseminating accurate information.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly a big thing that came through is a need for that in the research that we did. And Jay, I wonder if you can say a bit about yourself, but then we're going to kick off with a little bit from the research findings themselves to kick off our conversation, and then maybe you can just go into that. I think we're going to spend most of today focusing on one of the key areas of the findings, which is that around credibility and how one builds credibility in this space. So Jay, I'll hand it over to you to share a bit on yourself, and then a little bit on the research findings.
Great, I can do both of those. Hi, everyone. I'm Jay Barchas-Lichtenstein. I'm the Senior Research Manager at CNTI. My background is in linguistic anthropology and really particularly in understanding how information circulates and how people learn about the world that they live in, which is kind of the flip side of what Rachel just said, in the sense that I've come at it historically rather than from the journalism side and the production side, from the other side, going, how do people learn? What do they turn to? How do they decide what has value for them? In terms of the report that we did, we collaborated really closely with Project C, which is another organization in this information space that works on supporting primarily, but not exclusively, former journalists who are working in the creator environment. And we recruited 26 people within the US who we interviewed. We also spoke to quite a number of people in South Africa. That report will be out this week. We encourage everyone to take a look for it. But today we're really going to focus on the US. The people we spoke to came from a number of different backgrounds. Some of them were former journalists. Some of them were people like Terrill who had subject matter experience of one kind or another and were communicating about that. And part of the reason we use the term indie info provider is to come up with a term that's a little more inclusive because a lot of people were uncomfortable with creator journalist, either because they don't consider themselves a creator or because they don't consider themselves a journalist. And our definition of who we talked about, I think, is an important starting point. So we wanted to capture people who are performing acts of journalism. That's a phrase I think I've heard from Rachel that I think is quite helpful here. Essentially, we had three criteria. Are you providing verified factual information? Are you doing it through a personality or a voice-driven brand rather than a institutional brand? And are you leveraging the creator economy? As Amy said, we have findings about a number of different topics, including their professional backgrounds, their learning experiences, how they make money, their approach to distribution platforms. But I want to start us off with our findings about credibility, since that's our focus today. So essentially, what we heard from the folks we interviewed is that there are two different modes of credibility. One mode of credibility is authority, and one is authenticity. And authority is what you think about when you think about legacy journalism. So it's rooted in credentials, it's rooted in policies. It tends to be a little more one directional. There's really an institutional voice, not a personal voice. And there's this idea that the work stands for itself, identity is a distraction. On the authenticity side, it's rooted in shared experiences and identities, not just credentials. The tone is a little more personal and human. You're talking to your neighbor, you're talking to your friend. It's also more multi-directional, and there is use of personal experiences as a part of credibility. And so we heard about both of these modes. In general, pretty much everyone we interviewed made use of both of them, albeit in different ways.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jay. And kicking off from that, I mean, this combination of authenticity, humanity, of bringing who you are, along with the rigor, seems to be, a really important component of building that audience relationship. And so I'd love to maybe start with Phil and Terrill on how you think about that relationship, the tension, where each of you kind of focuses attention and communication with the audience to try to convey those two components, or do you lean more towards one or the other? Phil, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that like I'm someone who has a lot of personal anxiety about the authenticity element. Like I came to Vox 10 or however many years ago, not really wanting myself in there at all, not even wanting an editorial perspective. And I quickly kind of realized that it would help elevate my position within the organization to add a little bit of that. Um, I still sort of wish it weren't necessary, to be perfectly honest. And now the kind of authenticity that I primarily perform is it is performed. Like I don't have to give away everything to my audience, but you do inevitably end up giving up some stuff. And so the balance that I strike with it now is that I do let in my own editorial opinions somewhat. But I try to put myself on camera when I'm presenting something that's an opinion and never have it sort of be presented as fact. Like I try to signal for the audience that it's an opinion when I can. Um, and I mean, I've found that if anything, like people want to push me to have more or stronger opinions in the audience. And so it kind of just has to be an act of will to resist that and play it a little more down the middle. Um, so yeah, it's kind of an uncomfortable thing for me to be perfectly
Yeah,
honest. Like
yeah,
I haven't reconciled it, but I think it might be good to hear somebody say that just because so often in the media you just hear people being like, you've got to be authentic and love
right.
performing. And it's like you can be uncomfortable with it and still make it work too. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so important to surface that feeling and the tension of like I want to, because there's also in some ways a difference between bringing personality and bringing opinion. Like one can bring
Yeah.
self without bringing opinion, and that's also seems like that's that's a tricky balance as well. And so before we go deeper, I just, Terrill, from your vantage point, you sort of come at it almost in a very different way, almost the opposite way, which is advocacy, like really working for something. So how do you take that sort of starting from the advocacy side, or that this is who I am and what I care about and working for, and then build the rigor to sort of prove the authority of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have that work life experience. Like the trust is kind of grandfathered in, right? Because I do have at least 14 months as a sanitation worker. But then also it's also very niche, right? And so I have it easier than some other creators because I'm a niche. Like anybody who looks for me or comes for me is looking for environmental justice, is looking for cleanups, is looking for information about trash, or no one's coming to me and asking me like, what are the latest sneakers coming out, right? So
Yeah.
everybody that's following me is coming already for a purpose and they know what they're coming for. So I just have the responsibility of making sure that I feed them correct information, but I'm giving them what they're here for. It's like, and sometimes I'll vary off, and I may try like a little personal thing, or I might like say something that my kids said to me and stuff, and they may like laugh, like, "Oh, that's cute. He's a dad." But what about trash? Like, it's always like that was nice, but let's get back to what we're here
Get
for.
back to
So
business. Yeah.
yeah, so so I know for me the authority I have is that I know what people are here for. I know what they're coming for. I know what they come to my Instagram for. Someone just told me like it gave me a stat that like I'm like when it comes to trash, I'm like the second or third Instagram that pops up when you say words like trash, environmental trash. So like to me that's like a big responsibility. Like there are people reaching out from all over the country that's like, "Oh, I thought you were in my city because every time I look up trash, you come up." I'm like, "No, I'm not." So, but
Yeah.
that's the but again, that's I guess that's like again a responsibility for me to make sure I stay authentic and I give the people what they're coming for. Like if I just started talking about other stuff, I think I would lose some trust.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess and maybe we'll come back to this in a little bit too, but like to show your information is accurate, is it, source link. So people may come to you to say, is it okay for me to buy this latest brand of shoe? Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then that's showing that you have accurate information that you're drawing from is, I guess, a way that one would build that authority part of the work that you're putting in front
Yeah,
of
yeah, no, that's a
people.
great point. Yeah, I can't just be saying whatever comes to the top of my head. Like when people ask me questions, it usually takes me like a few days to respond because then I have to go back and hit my sources, and then I have to double check my sources, and I have to make sure that the industry is saying the same thing that my sources are saying. So it's like it's a thing. It's a
Yeah,
thing.
yeah, it's reporting. And Rachel, that's a lot of what you all focus on is trying to work with folks like Terrill and focusing more on those who are looking to build the journalistic part of the work that is what Phil brings naturally to this, and get that training in across a pretty wide mix of folks. How do you like balance and including folks where like authenticity isn't something that's trained in journalism school for what you're supposed to bring to it? What are the kinds of toolkits, approaches, trainings, messages that you work to give your core of creators?
Yeah, so I want to come at this from a little bit of a different perspective. I do feel like when we talk about credibility and like, do creators have credibility? I think that it's a little bit of an inside baseball question. The only people who are asking that are people who are in the media space because they already have the credibility of the audience. Like the reason we're paying attention to them is because we have noticed that people are listening to them. They already have the trust, they already have the credibility. And I think that they can come at that credibility in a few different ways. They can be a specialist, like I'm sharing information from my job. In our program, we have an OBGYN, we have a meteorologist, we have, people who have a certain set of skills, but we also have people who have become an expert in that thing. And that's usually just through reporting, reading a lot about it. And what I like to think about it is it's like if you were going to happy hour with your smartest friend, or maybe your friend who has kids a few years older and has already navigated the paperwork for this thing. And so I see this credibility coming out as basically just table stakes. Like they're not going to have an audience if they don't have that. But you're right. We do teach these fact-checking premises. We teach how to interview, how to spot AI, how to file public records requests. And what we always say from our platform or from our training is that I want it to feel like Botox, not plastic surgery. And so your audience shouldn't really notice that you have been through our program other than you being maybe 10% better or you're able to implement new skills. But we don't want to change what makes you you because that's why you got popular in the first place.
Yeah. So let's talk about audience and communicating with audience for a bit. I mean, I think there's a lot to what you're saying, Rachel, about people have proven their credibility by building an audience. There's also a lot of creators now who are coming to this new, right? They're looking to build audience. So how do you and Terrill and Phil, how do you think about that communication to your audiences? One of the things that's come up in some of the different conversations we've been having since this research came out is, do you have a ethics policy on your website? Do you have your standards of, the processes that you use, the things you don't use? Do you label things in your content? I was noticing, Phil, in one of your excellent pieces I was watching recently on Amazon, you had a break in the middle, a lunch break that was sponsored, by whoever the sponsor was. How do you talk about those kinds of things with your audiences and where that kind of what lines you build, how you make decisions about what you put out there? Is it something that's transparent? Talk a little bit about that. And Phil, I'll go back to you first.
Yeah, it's so funny how the accountability works on those things because sometimes I feel like I'm like no one cares about the reporting or the original research or comments on that. But if I were to cross some sort of ethical line like that, I would hear about it almost instantly. So I'd say that that's, kind of a good thing to be held to account by your audience in that way. One funny thing is that on my sponsorships, I put a little progress bar and it slides over as the sponsorship progresses. So at the end, it's at the end of the screen. And
Mm.
there was actually a YouTuber who measured and tracked the speed at which all the different progress bars across different YouTubers traveled because some of them were slowing it down artificially to make it seem like the ad was shorter than it was actually going to be. So he like
Oh, that's
computer programmed a way to track that it was going the exact right speed. And so you are held to account in that fashion. I mean,
yeah.
it's almost a little like the credibility issue, like what Rachel was bringing up about how creators have this credibility through their relationship to their audience. In some ways, I wish the audience would hold more people more accountable on these ethical fronts and on the research fronts. I think a lot of it is just your personal preference, unfortunately. I don't think the audience is very savvy a lot of the time. And so I have these like personal values of disclosing my sponsorships. That's pretty obvious because it'll be in the text or it'll be with a bar. And then, kind of putting in a source document that's free to access all the sources I used, a little more about the interviews, and any other resources that I might have used. But, sometimes I feel like I'm almost catering to a really small percentage of my audience with that kind of stuff, and it's just me being anal retentive about it. So yeah, it's
But it's also like,
you
if you're gonna, I mean, and one of the we were doing a thing at O&A, and one of the things that a creator there was talking about was, I have other work that I get paid for. I write about
oh
political stuff. I have other work that I get paid. Do I need to tell my audiences about that? And like my
yeah.
answer was like, well, do you want them to learn from you or do you want them to learn from somebody else? So,
Yeah.
it's sort of like better to be upfront than not in a lot of ways. And if most people don't care, great. But
Yeah, it's kind of a drag because it's like I think people have such different ideas about what they should disclose. Like, for example, I had a former sponsor this drink Huel that I'm like sipping from right now. I like, I like it or whatever. But if I ever did a story on
yeah,
protein powder
yeah,
or something like that, I would definitely say in the story, like, I was sponsored by Huel, so, take that. And, it doesn't compromise me or in any way, but the audience should know that. I don't think those practices are universalized at all
yeah.
across creators. So, you
I think
know,
that's really the case, and I'm going to come back to Rachel and Jay for a little bit more on that. But before I do, Terrill, how do you talk to your audiences about credibility, including the way that you get paid?
I'm very open. I'm very open. I post a lot on my Instagram about when I'm receiving a sponsorship. Sometimes I'm listen, guys. I'm applying for a grant. If you know or have a cousin that's on the board, shout out your boy. Like, put a good word in for me. I'm very transparent, and I think the more transparent you are, it's easy for you to just have a conversation. What I found with my audience is a lot of people say I feel like you're talking to me and not at me.
Mm,
So I guess I just have this personable way of just communicating my message to people, but it makes them feel like we're buddies, or we're just chilling somewhere having a conversation about why this thing is happening. So I think when you're able to just be as transparent as possible and say this is what it is, this is what this ain't, you more than likely just again create that trust bridge where it's like, okay, Terrell said this, I believe him, and then if something else comes out and they go, oh no, Terrell didn't say that, or he would have told us, or like for example. I was texting my daughter and she was like, "Oh, my best friend don't want to be my best friend no more because somebody told her not to be my best friend." So I just literally took a screenshot of our text message and I was like, and I told her like, "It's okay. God removed them for your life, and you'll always have your dad as a best friend." And I did it at like 3:45 in the afternoon. It got 20,000 views, and it got
wow.
200 comments. And I was like, sometimes people just want to know that you're going through what they're going through, or they want to
Yeah,
just, human nature, every human being wants to belong to something or someone or some group, right? So when you create opportunities for them to feel included, that you just harp on the trust, and they just have an easiness about trusting you or conversating with you. And people inbox me all the time being vulnerable, like, hey, I actually threw my recyclable out in the trash and I'm sorry. And I'm like, it's okay. Like,
yeah.
you're not gonna, go to jail. There's no, but let's figure out how you're not doing next time. But people just feel compelled to, just be open with you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I know Jay, in the research that we did, there was certainly some findings on that direct relationship with audiences. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about that. But then also, I mean, and I'm going to come to you, Rachel, on this also as well. But there's a lot of ad hocness to what each creator, indie provider may be doing or not doing when it comes to how you communicate that credibility to your audiences and the authenticity. What did the research find about the degree to which there is or isn't kind of a sense of standard to follow?
Yeah. So first, I want to note outside our own research, there are multiple initiatives being done by various professional groups kind of trying to build this standard. There's folks at ONA working on this, there's folks at Shorenstein working on this, there's folks at Trusting News working on this. So there are a lot of people thinking about this question. Project C is also working on this. One thing that makes it challenging is that some of it is audience specific. Credibility isn't as much as we want to think it is. It's not a trait of people, it's really a relationship. And what one group of people finds credible and cares about is going to be different than another set of people, as Phil was pointing to. And so, in that sense, it's really hard to come up with something that's totally one size fits all. That said, for most people, it really was a both and. So there was a fair bit of consensus around showing your work. And showing your work means transparency around both sourcing, how do you make decisions, also transparency about sources of funding in particular. That was one where across the board, folks felt like it was important to be able to point to how did I come up with this, who paid me to do it. And that's not incompatible with being a person. To your point about audiences, especially for the folks who are doing local news, a huge source of both credibility and audience input was I shop at the same grocery store as you. My kids go to the same school as your kids. You literally see me around and you know that I live here and I care about this community in the way that you do. And also, if you have a problem with what I'm reporting, you can tell me so in the grocery store. You can tell me so at school pickup.
Yeah,
And that
yeah,
sort of presence in people's lives, at least for folks doing local work, was really important.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, so Rachel, a part of this is, to what degree is there a value in having standard? I mean, you were talking about this as kind of table stakes, as creators need to be able to be individual, and creators. Where do you and NCC come down on the balance of having something that is both helpful for people, maybe who are the creator providers, who want to kind of have some structure to bring to the way they talk about this, and what they do and don't do and how they communicate it, versus the sort of freedom to figure out what that right balance is? How does News Creator Corps approach that?
We really encourage all of our creators to think deeply about their ethical boundaries, and as really more of a relationship between you and your audience. What are you committing to? We encourage them to publish that, to share that with their audience, and also share that with potential sponsors or partners that they might be working with, that like, this is what I am committed to. What that document says is going to be different for different creators. The way in which they interact with political candidates, the way in which they source different documents might be totally different based on their audience, their location, what they're talking about, what kind of creator that they are. And so we don't expect every creator in our program to have the same ethical statement, but we do think that they need one, and they need one that they can stand behind and share with their audience.
How do
I
they
also
figure out?
think that
Go ahead.
I also think that in many ways we hold creators to a higher standard than we do journalists. We like to say things like, oh, they don't care, but they do care. Just because someone doesn't say anything, it's probably because you're doing it right. There's all these things that we care about in the world that we never talk about until they go wrong. And it doesn't mean that we don't care about them. That just means that they're not top of mind. And so I do think that readers and viewers and subscribers and followers and all of the words that we have for the audience, I do think they care about how you do your work. And that care is shown in many different ways. But I think this question of ethics and who are they getting paid by is something that we are drilling down into in for creators, and maybe giving traditional journalists a pass when in many ways they are very, very similar.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the things we've also heard is that a lot of them wouldn't know where to start. So I think, trying to balance the time it takes to, you want to do your work, but you also don't want to screw up by not saying, being transparent, or making sure that you articulate, or you take certain steps, etc. So I guess the question is, is there some structure that's a starting point? Certainly it sounds like you're saying, yes, have something on your site, but then how do you build what that is, and figure that out for your connection to your audiences and your work?
That's something that we're working with. We're building the very early stages with Trusting News and Project C. The the way that we think that this should work is there should be a framework in where you can essentially see different versions of topics that you want to address. So maybe that's political donations or how you're going to use AI. And let's say there's 5 different sentences underneath that, and you can find the one that you feel like you want to commit to, because we don't think that every creator should have to commit to the same version of it.
Yeah.
And so we are working on building out that framework, because if this is not something that you went to school for or have spent a lot of time in, it's not going to come naturally to you, and that doesn't mean anything about your success as a creator.
Yeah. How do you deal with that, Phil? Do you have something on your site, and did you carry something over from Box and bring it with you?
No, I prefer to do things on a per video basis, and
Mhm.
I also feel like there are just so many things that are just really these like cultural touch points for people that they're going to react to. Like if I put, for example, an AI policy on my site, and perhaps this is the sort of question that y'all can help people out with, like me. Um, my use of AI is very like surgical, I guess. So I don't use it to write everything, but like as a video producer, I certainly make transcripts from AI and stuff like that. And so I wouldn't know kind of where to start or stop with some of that stuff. So um so I end up usually just putting it in a per video basis if I have a conflict, and then yeah, I unfortunately I think a lot of it ends up being relational, in my
Yeah,
case.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting. How about you, Terrill? Do you do it per piece? Do you have something on your site? And how did you figure it out?
Ah, this is like one of the biggest tips I'm in when it comes to AI and stuff. Um, I'm still trying to figure it out, to be honest. Like being an environmentalist and knowing what the water farms are doing to, and all that stuff. But like, there is a general great use for it that you can use for the mission. So I'm like in the middle, but I'm very honest and transparent. Like the other day I had made a flyer with AI and I posted it and the DMs went crazy. And I was like, okay guys, I hear you, I got it. But do you see I could just tell it what to do. It did it for me because I'm also like a one man show, like Phil. Like I don't have a producer, I don't have an editor, I don't have a staff. Like for a while I had my daughter and then she said, well, if you're not going to pay me, I'm not, this is against child labor laws, so now I'm not helping you no
Good
more.
for her.
So I'm like, okay, cool, I hear you. But yeah, so it's hard when you're like a one man person doing it on your own. But I think you have to tell people, and you have to let them know. But yeah, I sprinkle it in every once in a while, and sometimes it gets overlooked because it's really good, and then other times people are like, "Bro, stop it."
Yeah. So to that point, to the bro stop it. I mean, and CNTI has been doing a lot of work on the audience relationship. What does the audience care about and not care about? And really, it's about the fact that you stand by your work. Point blank is a lot of what sort of it comes down to in the end, and that they would rather it's better to have transparency, even if nobody's really looking at it, than to not have it. But certainly to stand by your work. Um, have you either of you run into a ethics situation or something you kind of got called out on that you had to be like, "Ooh, man, maybe I should have communicated that more clearly or thought about it, or maybe that wasn't such a good thing to do."
I'll go first.
Yeah.
No, because the way I've set up my Instagram is like you're talking to a friend. I cuss a lot, a whole lot, a whole lot. So a lot of people don't expect me to be uppity and proper and, very polished. I'm very boots on the ground. Like, this is what it is. This is what it ain't. This is how I feel right now. And if I want to use like 2 to 3 F bombs in the next 4 sentences, my audience expects it. If it's getting to the point, if I'm like I'm not doing, I'm just being too polished, they're like, "Are you okay? Is something going on? Like, are you is the CIA watching your Instagram or something? Like, why are you? What's going on?" And so, I think I lucked up by setting my audience up to really understand that this I'm going to be like I tell people all the time, the same Terrell you see on Instagram is the same Terrell you're going to see at Walmart, is the same Terrell you're going to see in line at Chick-fil-A. You're never going to see different versions of Terrell. So I
Yeah.
think I've kind of I've kind of set my audience up to expect the nice, the rigid version of me at all times.
Yeah. Uh, uh, Authenticity, all in. Phil, I'm curious if you've had any sort of experience that was kind of like, ooh, maybe I hit that boundary line, and or how you think about it differently than when you were at Vox. I mean, you said you were kind of uncomfortable with the whole personality part of it, and bringing yourself to it. Is there some freeing component? Is the what's the dynamic of that, of the change there?
Um, I mean, I guess I've realized it's sort of like it's sort of like when you get into this business on your own, you go from like baby to adult in 3 years and you learn all these media lessons that people on the business side knew already, and you're just so naive about it, you know? Um, Even as a person who likes business and listens to media podcasts and whatnot. And so it took me a long time to realize that I'm not in the me business. I'm in like the audience capture business, and they will
Mm,
only follow me so far. And so I'm actually working to kind of narrow my interests as much as possible. I'm kind of I'm not authentic in some ways in that I don't share a lot about my personal life or my personal preferences, but I'm almost too authentic in that I don't constrain my interests enough to a beat. So that's something that I'm kind of working on. Um, and then as far as the line crossing thing, I hate that the only example that pops to mind is one that's going to sound rather self-aggrandizing, but if you want, I can tell you lots of ways in which I'm a bad person too. I'm sure I have a list, but like there was this formative moment for me when we had a creator come speak to us at Vox because we occasionally had people lecture to us. And this creator revealed that their a post that they had done on Instagram that had gone viral had a significant methodological flaw and was just wrong, you know? And so this creator decided to kind of append a little correction in the comment rather than delete the post. And I said to myself, gosh, that is a no, that is a line that I'm never going to cross. And my personal feeling is that the mechanisms of corrections on these social networks are insufficient to stop spread, and that I personally, again, it's totally personal, right? My
yeah.
personal feeling is that you need to delete the post, and maybe you could re-upload a corrected post, but you need to stop the flow of lies, you know? And
Hmm.
so through really only small fault of my own, I had a photo in which I had followed the newspaper attribution of the person in the photograph. And then later on, maybe a week later, through subsequent research, I discovered that they'd been misdescribed by the photo caption in this like 1985 photo or
Oh,
whatever.
interesting. Huh.
And the short had done 2 million views. It was hugely viral, and it was still going, but there's no way to append a correction in a real way. And so I was just like, all right, I said I wasn't going to be like this creator that we had at Vox. And so I just like, I'm like crying while I press the delete button, and I ended
Wow.
up having to delete it, you know. And so that's probably the most direct
Yeah.
example of something that's happened like
Did
that, where
you
it's just
did you
like, shoot, you know.
did you put out a statement? Did you let people know you were taking it down
No,
and why, or just
I don't I might have put a story, and then people would ask too like where the short had gone, and then I told them that, why. But there's no good way to like put it up again without the error
yeah,
propounding
yeah.
itself. And in this case it was quite trivial. It was just like I said the person was Bob Smith instead of Sue, Jones or whatever, So it's frustrating. That's a limitation of the platform. They don't let you upload corrections. You can on YouTube sometimes if you use wizardry to go through the back end and stuff like that. But I just didn't want to do it, so there's
Well,
all
and
sorts of.
that's interesting because how do the platforms help you, or not help you, I guess, potentially in in what's doable there. And I know, Rachel, we're going to turn to audience questions in just a sec. So if Kayla, you've got some things that you can bring in, that'd be great. But while we're doing that, Rachel, and then maybe Jay for a minute on, as the scaling happens, right? As there's more that are coming in to be their individual brands, themselves, they're small. Where are the greatest sort of bumps in the road, right? The greatest humps to get across? I know, we heard certainly a lot about just time. How the heck do I keep doing all this by myself? But where are you seeing some of those areas, and what is the way technology could potentially be supportive, whether it's platforms, or otherwise in that space? Rachel.
We always tell our creators who come to us at many different stages of their careers that you should build your channel or whatever you want to call it as if it was where you want to be. And not everyone wants to have 3 million followers. So if your goal is to have 10,000 and you want to be able to deeply engage with those 10,000, great. But wherever your goal is to be, act like you are there already. Have the ethics in place. Kind of like fake it till you make it, because when you get there, a lot of things can be really distracting. If you have a sponsor come in who is waving a big number in front of you and it's not really something you're comfortable with, it's actually really hard to turn down that big number if you haven't like really thought about this beforehand. And so we always tell people that they should really just think about this as they're building so that there isn't one like crazy moment that they have in the future.
Which is what Phil did, right? Make set your ground barriers, your ground rules before you hit that moment where you have to decide on the spot what to do, because then maybe it's really harder to hit that delete button. Jay, what do we see in the research there?
Uh, Definitely some of the same questions, and a lot of the ethical questions often are beat specific, which is helpful in the sense that folks who are already coming from an area of expertise know what the issues are. So, for example, someone who is a sports reporter knew going in, my hard line is that I won't take ads from anything involved with gambling or betting. And that's just not an issue in other beats because they don't want to advertise there. So it sort of doesn't matter. And this person knew that this would be an issue. They had a line. Another big challenge that we're seeing on the research, in addition to broadly, we talked about this early on. What does it mean to run a small business? Oh, I thought I was just doing the same thing, but there's all this stuff that was totally invisible to me working for someone else that I have to do now. So that's
Yeah.
probably the biggest one. The other one is, to your point, technology in the sense of building workflows that connect all of the different pieces of technology that you're using. So whatever you're using to write, whatever you're using to transcribe, whatever you're using to publish, coordinating across platforms, there's a lot of moving pieces and people are kind of patchworking together a lot of different tools for the most part, and finding a way to integrate that without a lot of redundancy is really hard. That's not unique, I think, to this space. Like that's a problem for newsrooms also.
Yeah.
I want to chime in
Yeah.
on the infrastructure part for a second, because that is a huge part of being a creator. It's also beyond being a creator. It's why many people can't start businesses or go freelance or whatever they want to do. So this is not creator specific, but it is something that NCC is taking really seriously and that we're looking into. So we are trying to see what it would look like to create a health insurance plan for a network of creators, or can we offer them a discount or some sort of coordinated package for media liability insurance? The things that are really going to touch their day-to-day life. We had a creator who had to take out extra insurance to protect her house in case she were to get sued for defamation, something like that. And so we want to really look at not only sort of these day to day, but like what are the things that keep this whole thing like working? And what are the areas that are taking up too much brain space of the creators that if we were able to take some of that weight off, they would have more brain space to create the content that they want to create. We hear regularly that they have too many ideas and just not enough time or resources. And so we're really looking into how we can provide that infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think business was the first, and foremost thing was, holy heck, I'm running a business and I didn't, I didn't really know I was signing up for this. How do I do that? I think we need to have a whole nother webinar hour on that. Kayla, do we have some questions?
Yes, we do. So I'll start with the latest one. Anyone in the panel, feel free to answer this. But after 22 years in traditional broadcast journalism to recently becoming independent, where do you find funding, grants, fellowships, and how do you set prices for sponsorships?
I guess I'll go. Uh, I do not have a traditional journalist, or as you guys say, I didn't go to J school. So, but I price like my sponsorships based off of what they want. Like some people only want a post and a reel, so that's one price. Some
Mhm.
people only want like a story, and they want you to put the link in your bio and stuff. Uh, in my research, I found that you should start at 10% of what your following is. So I have 37,000 followers on my biggest platform, which is Instagram. So if someone wants a package, it's just start at 3,700. So that's like rule of thumb.
That's interesting. Are you profitable?
I haven't had a W-2 job since 2020.
So
Yeah, so
you're
I've
so you're making money, but not so much that you're needing to.
Yeah, I would say I'm comfortable. Like, but see, I have multiple streams. So I have me as a content creator. I have my nonprofit, which I get grants and stuff for. Then I have a hauling company, which is a corporate. I have a C corp. So I started a hauling company where I have independent contractors work for me. We do junk jobs, demos, gardening, power washing, all that stuff. So I may not work this week and next week have five jobs and be able to sustain for 6 months. So,
Yeah.
but that's also another thing. You can't just rely on one thing. You have to have multiple streams.
Phil?
Yeah, I haven't pursued any grants or I mean because I'm primarily on YouTube and a little on the other social networks. So my business is pretty like scale oriented, at least right now. So most of my money comes from sponsorships, probably 70% maybe. Um, so yeah, and then for pricing that, I mean, I'm represented by an agency, and so they actually do kind of the negotiation of that stuff. But
Mm.
it's in YouTube land, the rough rule of thumb is that it's a CPM, a cost per milla based off your last how your video performs over the course of 30 days, basically. So that's kind of the rule of thumb there. Um, and that'll vary
Interesting.
wildly depending on what your audience is or what your stuff is, how all that stuff. So there's so many variables to all
Yeah.
of it depending on what audience people are having.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think one person has the same formula on how they price. Like even when it comes to like the grants that I apply for, some grants are project based and they're only offering micro grants for 5,000. And then some grants are like, here's 250,000 over the next 3 years. So it all depends on what, who, why, when, where, and how.
Yeah. It takes a lot of time too, in one day. Phil, when did you see the moment of starting to turn a profit, or do you, if I can ask?
Yeah, I mean my goal was basically like my goal was basically in the first year I wanted to hit my old salary and I had a severance from working
Mhm.
there for a while. And so I got that. And then last year, I don't know if I'm getting the chronology exactly right. But anyways, last year I know that last year I hit my old salary, but like with really picky accounting, you know? Like Like, well, you
Yeah.
have to pay
Yeah.
for healthcare. That's a part of your salary, or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
401k match was a part of your salary. So I hit that. So that, that's kind of been my goal each year. This year, who knows what'll happen? I think I'm probably aiming for roughly the same goal, which considering inflation is probably a pay cut from where I was at my old salary, but my old salary wasn't bad, so it's going all right. I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
I'm constantly hunting for new lines of business too. So like I actually hate short form content. No offense, but I don't like doing it. I think it like makes people worse. But that's a
Oh,
line that I'm willing to cross, for the sake of money. And so I do, and I do stuff I'm proud of, just as I'm sure Terrill does. So it's
Yeah.
like it's
Yeah.
okay. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
so
Yeah.
that's another, so you're constantly just hunting around for new lines of business, and I'm like, okay, do I want to make Patreon more of a thing this year, or do I want to still be going sponsorship? So it's always hunting and pecking for something.
Yeah. I know we could talk on this topic. I want to get one more question in at least. It's so hard to do what we want to in an hour. Kayla, one other question we want to get in before the hour's up.
Yes, for sure. So, this one is specifically for Rachel, but again, anyone can answer. But what do you mean when you say we hold creators to a higher standard than journalists? Um, this person also adds in that I have heard similar comments before, but even if traditional journalists fall short of our expectations, we do expect them to publish ethical standards, label sponsored content, disclose conflicts, and issue corrections. And they also have editors who hold them accountable. I'm not saying this makes them more trustworthy than creators, but they are our guardrails.
Totally. When I say that I think we hold creators to a higher standard than journalists, a lot of that is in the fallout or the commentary when there is an issue. If there is something that crosses an ethical boundary or something gets like a fact wrong, for instance, we say, this is the problem with creators. This is why creators shouldn't be giving news. But when the same exact thing happens to a journalist, we say it was a process error or everyone makes mistakes. There's far more grace than there are for creators. And I think a lot of that comes from us not really wanting to come to terms with it. There have always been parallel information systems. Like traditional mainstream media has underserved many populations for a very, very long time, but they like to think that they had the chokehold on that industry, and that's just not true. And so I do think that when creators make a mistake, we're all up in their business. But and we should be demanding corrections and policies. But in the same way that I believe that you really shouldn't trust a news organization that has never published a correction, you also, I think, really shouldn't trust a creator who has never said, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or has made an error and has worked to fix it. I think that's part of what makes us human. And, when you work on the internet, you make your mistakes on the internet.
Hmm. Interesting. Terrill, have you been approached to come under a brand?
Say it again.
Have you been approached by a brand to sort of come under, there's a lot of that's happening now and sort of that.
Oh, I've had a bunch of brand sponsorships. And I'm the I'm like Phil. We do a little something strange for a piece of change. So, I've recently had a hot sauce out. I've collaborated with a hot sauce company. So I had a hot sauce called Street Heat out, where it was like a mango habanero hot sauce with my likeness on it. I've had a beer out, and I don't even drink beer. So here in Philadelphia, we have a brewery called Human Robot, and I had a citrus lager out for 6 months. But see, so my thing is, I always do things with community in mind, and as someone who has some experience in sales, I know that things drive revenue. So a lot of people like beer. So I'm like, buy a beer and you get to clean a block. So our partnership was I would help them sell as many of these beers as possible, but then 10% would come back to my nonprofit. And we did really well. And selfishly, I had my likeness on a beer can. And so now I have one beer that I'll never open for the rest of my life on my mantelpiece. Same thing with the hot sauce. I've had a T-shirt. And like that's the thing about being a creator. Even though I have a niche, there's so many things that you can do that if you have a trusted audience, they'll support. Like I mean, I'm with a brand right now, Tatsu Tea. It's a matcha tea in a can, but it doesn't taste like grass. It's really good, I promise. And it's like we just came together, and they were like, we really care about the environment. We're an up and coming business. I was like, well, if you care about the environment, let's collaborate. And so we wrapped some trash cans, and they've dropped 10 trash cans in a part of Philadelphia, and they're paying for the trash cans to get picked up, and now the litter is about to go away in this part of the neighborhood. Like I'm very outside the boxy, but numbers have to make sense, and I both sides have to make it work. But I mean, like, you could do anything. I've had a soap out. I've had a fragrance out. It's just I don't say no to a lot of opportunities because it's fun, and I get to test the market, and I'll have a storage unit full of stuff that I've been a part of.
All right. Well, so we've got hot sauce, beer, t-shirts, protein drinks, all set for the summer grilling season. So we will leave it at that. I hope you follow these creators. If you are one, check out NCC. Please keep up with CNTI's research. We're doing a lot of cool stuff in this space, and we look forward to talking to you all soon. Take care. Thanks, everybody.